Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen TV. Every week we're looking at contemporary as well as some historical issues affecting the Arab world and affecting the world from the Arab area. And one such that meets both of those criteria is undoubtedly the historic elections in Egypt. The Egyptian revolution, of course, is not finished. A revolution is a process, not an event. It's still going. Whether it's still going ahead rather than backwards is no doubt something everyone will have a point of view about. My opinion is that the Egyptian revolution is still going ahead, and the achievement of the very first ever democratic election for a president of Egypt is of profound significance for Egypt, for the Arab area, and therefore, of course, for the world, because Egypt is the beating heart of the Arab world. The Arab world is at the epicenter of international events. And if things are going well in Egypt, it seems to me to presage improvement in the position, the condition of the Arabs in the region, and that has to be good for the world, at least for most of the world. We'll come back to that qualification in a minute. Let me put my cards on the table, because my cards are always on the table. I'm very glad that Dr. Mohammed Morsi won the presidency. I believe that a victory for the ex-dictator Mubarak's final prime minister would have sent an entirely negative signal to the Egyptian people that their revolution had been in vain, that it was indeed going to go backwards. That's not to say that Dr. Morsi would have been my first choice. In fact, he wasn't even the Muslim Brotherhood's first choice, but he was by far and away the best candidate to win the Egyptian presidency, so far as I was concerned. Now, I know that there's not a consensus about that, not in Egypt, not anywhere in the world. I know that there are many who fear the dawn of a presidency held by the Muslim Brotherhood. I myself think you have nothing to fear in that regard. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is not Al-Qaeda, it's not the Taliban, it's not some kind of medieval revanchist outfit that's going to take Egypt backwards. I believe that the moderate and considered approach, religious but cognizant of modern realities, that Morsi represents, is the way forward for Egypt. As I say, I myself would have voted for another candidate, but in the end, an election is about A or B. An election is about this one or that one, and I definitely would have chosen that one. So I believe that although this revolution will continue, there will continue to be tension, necessary tension between the democratically elected president and the military top brass in the SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, especially whilst we don't have an elected parliament in Egypt. That tension will no doubt have hiccups. There will be two steps forward, sometime one step back, maybe sometimes one step forward, two steps back. And much will be decided by the will and wishes of the Egyptian people on the street, on the squares, through their exertion of their newly found political power in the public sphere. But one of the things that interests me most, and if you know me, you'll know why, is what will this mean for Egypt's role in the region, and especially vis-à-vis the Palestinian question, a question which I have been intimately associated with for, well, more years than I'm going to admit. The siege of Gaza, which is 5 years old now, was not just an Israeli siege, it was an Egyptian siege. It was a Mubarak siege. I know that. I could show you the cuts and bruises to prove it. When I had to fight my way into Gaza to break the siege on Gaza, it was not Israelis I was fighting. It was not Israel that deported me. It was not Israel that blocked the goods going into Gaza. It was not Israel that stopped the people coming out of Gaza when the Israeli bombs and missiles were killing them. It was the forces of the dictator Hosni Mubarak. So Mubarak is gone now. Is Gaza free? Mubarak is gone now. Is Rafah open? If it's not open, when will it be open? What will be the future of Camp David? Will the Muslim Brotherhood presidency and the new parliament of Egypt, when it is elected, continue to play the role that was played by Egypt during Mubarak, or will it be different? And if it is different, how different will it be? Again, my cards are on the table. I don't expect, nobody should expect Egypt to go to war with Israel. That's not going to happen. Neither do I expect Egypt to announce the abrogation of the Camp David Accords. But there's a big space between going to war with Israel and doing something good for the Palestinian people. There's a big space between even Camp David, bad though it was, and what Mubarak was doing with his power in Egypt vis-à-vis the Palestinian people. So even if Camp David stays, even if there is no official statement that the siege of Gaza has been lifted, I'm expecting things to get better for the Palestinian people in Gaza, and quickly. And if they don't, then I believe there will be serious trouble inside the Palestinian entity in relationship to Egypt, and there'll be serious trouble in Egypt, because every Egyptian that I have ever met is 100% behind the Palestinian cause and 100% behind the easing of the blockade, 5 years of blockade, which the Palestinians in Gaza in particular have suffered. And never forget this. This siege on Gaza 5 years ago was imposed to punish them for how they voted in a democratic election. All this talk about democracy that you hear from Israel, which claims to be the only democracy in the area, from Britain and America that go around the world invading other people's countries in the name of democracy, when the Palestinian people exercised their democratic right and chose a government that the West didn't like, the result was this siege and this blockade. So, if we're looking at the aftermath of the Egyptian elections, we have a number of important questions to ask. How important is the victory of the Muslim Brotherhood in the presidency? Will a free parliament be allowed to be elected over these next months? And who will run the election? Who will count the votes? Will there be a real constitution in Egypt? And will the group of thieves and killers who used to run Egypt face justice? Will they be dealt with and held accountable for the many crimes that they committed? And furthermore, what will all of this mean for the Arabs and for the Palestinians in particular? Well, you know the format. I do most of the talking for the first part of the show, but the rest of the show is down to you. So We'll be back just in a minute after this. Welcome back to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen TV. Who wants to ask me the first question about Egypt and the aftermath of the Egyptian elections? Yes, madam.
مانويل مشيك، الجامعة اللبنانية، كلية الإعلام والتوثيق. بعد تحقيق فوز الإخوان المسلمين في مصر، هل سيدعمون إخوانهم المسلمين في السعودية بهدف الإطاحة بالملك؟ أيضا لدي سؤال ثاني، عندما قامت إسرائيل بقتل 9 أتراك على متن أسطول الحرية، كانت ردة الفعل التركية آنذاك أنهم لم يفعلوا شيئا، لم يسجلوا، كانت مجرد فقاعة صابون تجاه إسرائيل. هل تعتبر أن عهد الإخوان المسلمين وآرائهم وردة فعلهم تجاه إسرائيل هي أيضا مجرد تسجيل فقاعة صابون؟ أيضا لدي سؤال ثالث حول مرسي، ماذا تتوقع منه بعد وخصوصا تجاه إسرائيل، وخصوصا أن مرسي وأن نتنياهو كان من أول المباركين له في جولته الانتخابية؟ شكرا.
Well, I don't think we can blame Dr. Morsi, President Morsi, for the fact that Netanyahu congratulated him. It would be strange if Netanyahu did not attempt to get his congratulations in first. But I don't believe that Netanyahu sincerely meant his congratulations. I don't believe Netanyahu wanted the Muslim Brotherhood to win the presidency of Egypt. It's quite clear to me that none of the Western leaders, and I include Israel as a Western country, which it is politically, though not geographically, none of these people wanted the Muslim Brotherhood to win. They were happy when the Muslim Brotherhood was illegal, when its leaders were in exile or in prison or being tortured. That's what they preferred. But of course, once a revolution happens, once it was impossible to deny the Muslim Brotherhood the presidency, they have to roll with it, have to try to make the best of it. And that's what the meaning of not just Netanyahu's congratulations, but Mrs. Clinton's visit and so on are all about. It's important to know that the Muslim Brotherhood are not monolithic, neither in one country or between one country and another. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Turkey is very different from the Muslim Brotherhood in, say, Syria or in Libya. Very different. Inside each country, there are many different trends inside the Muslim Brotherhood. And some of those will be for a stronger, more militant, more challenging position for the movement vis-à-vis the military power, which still remains like a big elephant in the room that we can't avoid talking about, and whose role in the country remains to be negotiated. But it will be a process of negotiation rather than a dramatic event. What do I expect from Morsi? Well, I don't expect very much, so probably that's a way of inoculating myself against disappointment. Not because of any disrespect for him, but because he has no parliament, no constitution, and the effective power in the country remains the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, who have a financial and historical relationship with the United States that will not be broken overnight, and who have been running the country along with the dictator during these last decades, in which a certain role from Egypt vis-à-vis Israel has been developed. That will not change overnight either. A better question is this: will President Morsi be determined to place Egypt's great weight in international affairs, its diplomatic weight, its historical, cultural importance? Will President Morsi be seeking to put that weight at the disposal of the Palestinian side of the argument rather than the Israeli side like Mubarack did? I'm absolutely clear about that. He will want to, and he will try to, strengthen the Palestinian hand in the international arena. But that's for tomorrow. What about today? Today we have the right to say there is no justification at all for starving the Palestinian people in Gaza. 90% of their water is now unpalatable for human beings. So hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children in Gaza don't have access to clean water. According to the Save the Children Fund and other international charities, by the way, the 80% of the people are dependent on food aid. 40% of them are unemployed. 40% of them are living on less than $1.50 a day. People can't get out for urgent operations. Medicine and equipment cannot get in to treat people inside. We can't accept this any longer. Even if they have to go under the ground, all of this material must be allowed in. And all of the people who need to come out need to be allowed out. I believe this is one of the yardsticks by which we will judge President Morsi's first Muslim Brotherhood presidency of Egypt. Thanks for the call. Yes, sister.
رئيفة نصر الدين كلية الإعلام والتوثيق. محمد مرسي هو أول رئيس إخواني مدني منتخب يصل إلى هذا المنصب في مصر. فما هي طبيعة العلاقة المرتقبة بين الرئيس الإخواني المدني وبين العسكر في مصر؟ وبالتالي ما هو دور هذا العسكر بعد حسني مبارك في مصر؟ شكرا.
Well, you kind of have to flirt with an army that is millions strong and bristling with weapons and can kill or maim you and your supporters at any time and can overthrow your government at any time. So a little bit of flirting, as long as it's halal, is going to be necessary. We don't want it going beyond the halal. This is when this question would have more power for me. A little bit of flirting, a little bit of respect is going to be necessary. Look on it, if you will, as a dance. You have to edge your dancing partner off the stage. You can't throw them off because they are stronger than you. You can't order them off because they won't take your orders. And this process has been done before. Of course, this is the first time in the Arab world, but the President of Turkey is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Prime Minister of Turkey is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they too had a military that was regularly in power and was always the deep state controlling events inside Turkey, whoever was the elected Prime Minister. And it's been a long and difficult job for Erdogan to get the military off the stage. Indeed, it's been difficult for him to avoid being overthrown by military coup d'etat constantly fermenting in the ranks of the officer class in the military. Now, sometimes Erdogan is flirting with them, sometimes he's putting them in jail and putting them on trial. Let's hope in Egypt there's no need for jail or trial. And let's hope the flirting works. But it is a process and not an event. Don't expect anything to happen in a day. And don't expect there not to be days where you are disappointed by the level of this flirting, as long as this flirting is not leading to something haram. Who wants to be the third questioner? Yes, sir. Go ahead, please. Stand up, please. Stand up.
بداية جد شيء. بداية بدي وجه تحية للشعب المصري يلي أثبت هيدا الشعب إنه الميادين والحريات هي مصدر السلطات، وأثبت بعد ولادة هذا القائد العربي في الأمس إنه الشعب هو مصدر السلطة بمصر. اثنين، يمكن من المعيب جدا على دولة نعرف نحن مصر وعراقة مصر، وهي كانت من الأساس في بناء جامعة الدول العربية. فهذه الدولة التي ساهمت في بناء جامعة الدول العربية، هذه الجامعة التي هي مثل معبر إقليمي للدول العربية يشابه الأمم المتحدة، هي بداية من أبرز أهدافها حماية الكيان العربي واستقلاله وسيادته. رأينا أن مصر أو خلال العهود السابقة للنظام المصري أن بعض الرؤساء قام بتوقيع يمكن معاهدة كامب ديفيد، وكما هناك أنشئ علاقات دبلوماسية بين مصر وإسرائيل. هذا طبعا في وجود انتهاك وقتل لأطفال فلسطين، وفي وجود انتهاك لأراضي عربية منها في لبنان وفي سوريا. اليوم أتمنى على الرئيس المصري، نعلم أن الرئيس مرسي لديه في الداخل المصري اليوم عدة مراحل. بداية هناك مرحلة سياسية عليه بناء وتثبيت الديمقراطية والكيان. اثنين، عليه طبعا في أزمة اقتصادية بده يتوجه لها. ثالثا، أتمنى بعد انتهائه من الأزمة الداخلية أن ينظر إلى العرب، أن ينظر إلى الجدار الذي بني، أن يعيد النظر في اتفاقية كامب ديفيد، لعلنا نعود إلى جامعة الدول العربية ونتوحد ونتجه سويا نحو الأمم المتحدة لوجود حل لهذه الأزمة ولهذه القضية الفلسطينية العريقة. بنظركم مستر جورج، كيف ينظر اليوم الغرب لهذا الشرق الثائر الذي بدأ يغير أنظمته رويدا؟ هل ينظر بخوف؟ هل يعيد النظر في العلاقات الدولية وتوترها؟ هل ينظر بأن العرب بعد الثورة وتغيير الأنظمة الداخلية سيغيرون النظام العربي ويجتمعون في ظل جامعة عربية تواجه الغرب؟ شكرا.
That was a very serious question, a very powerful question, and I'm going to have to answer it after this break. Welcome back to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen TV. Welcome back to the studio audience here in Beirut and to the audience watching throughout the Arab world. Before the break, a very intelligent and powerful question was asked of me by the young man at the front. And in many ways, we could spend the rest of the show dealing only with this one question, but we cannot. So forgive me if I compress my response to your powerful question thus. Firstly, the Arabs have a league. Who knew? I didn't know that. For nearly 40 years I've been working with the Arabs. I never knew they had a league until recently. And the Western countries didn't pay any attention at all to this league until recently. Now that could be because the Western countries suddenly became very much smarter, or it could be because they find in the current conjuncture some usefulness for this Arab League. There are so many important parts of your question. First of all, it's true that though Egypt was the first to sign the surrender peace with Israel, it was not the last. And not only the countries who subsequently signed actually did surrender. Some even continued to talk as if they were not surrendering, but act as if they had surrendered. And oddly, the hardline fanatic Islamist trend is making jihad not against the countries who signed, not against the countries who didn't sign but actually surrendered, but making jihad against The one country which refused to sign, refused to surrender, and refused to break its relations with the Palestinian resistance. And you know that I refer, of course, to Syria. I'm saying to you that Egypt will not break with Camp David. But even if it just implements Camp David, it will be better than what Mubarack was doing, because Camp David was not nearly as bad as what Mubarack was doing. It never said in Camp David, you have to besiege the Palestinians in Gaza, you have to starve their children, you have to lock the gates so that Israel can kill them. None of this was in Camp David. So if they just stop doing that and implement Camp David, that will be an improvement. I don't think Egypt will abrogate Camp David, but I believe that it will, in time, wither on the vine. And I believe in the short term, there will be this practical relief, which is vitally necessary, by the way. It's more important than a public declaration. Just for the tunnels to be able to operate without somebody trying to destroy them and kill the people inside them. Just for the gate to be open so that the people and things can come and go into Gaza, and the people in Gaza can live a normal life. But neither am I saying that the other Arab countries should follow Egypt in this regard. Countries which have not signed should not normalize their relations with Israel, because how can you normalize relations with a state which is killing a part of your own body? It's one thing not being able to break a treaty that you've already signed. It would be quite a different thing to edge towards a general Camp David affecting all the Arab countries. There wasn't a case for Sadat signing Camp David. There is even less of a case now, after all this time, for the other Arabs to normalize their relations with Netanyahu's Israel. As I said, I could talk a long time about your question, but I can deal only with one other part of it. You ask me what's the West's attitude to these Arab revolutions. Well, I tried to say in my introductory remarks that the West would have preferred no revolutions at all. If there had to be revolutions, they prefer that pro-Western stooge governments emerge from those revolutions. If they can't have that, they'll choose for themselves the best available option. But the most important thing for you, the Arabs, to know is not only that it's nothing to do with the West, what happens in the Arab world. The Arabs are a nation with the right of self-determination. America doesn't have the right to choose the government of Russia. The West doesn't have the right to choose the governments of the Arab world. So not only is it not their business, actually, it's a mistake to overestimate the influence and the role that they have in this. There are conspiracy theorists everywhere, especially in the Arab and Muslim world, who think that everything that happens in the world is decided by the Bilderberg or the Illuminati or the Freemasons or some secret conclave somewhere. This is nonsense. The outcome of the Egyptian revolution will be decided by the boots of tens of millions of Egyptians, which no small group of Western politicians can possibly control. It's a big mistake to imagine that the West are James Bonds. They're much more Austin Powers than James Bonds. Don't be afraid of them. Don't lose your confidence in the face of them. Now, we've heard me talk about what the Palestinian people think. Let's hear from them by Skype, which we recorded earlier. Take a look at this.
أنا عبد الله السيد، بكالوريوس إدارة أعمال، ناشط مجتمعي، ناشط شبابي، مدرب تنمية بشرية. بتمنى من الدكتور محمد مرسي إنه ينفي كل الاتهامات التي كانت عليه وحكوا عنه أنه هو جاء نتاج سياسة إسرائيلية أمريكية حتى يقدم شيء أفضل للمصريين والفلسطينيين والوطن العربي. بداية مصر دولة محورية ولها كلمة الفصل. بنتمنى أنه كمان يكون له دور كبير في المصالحة الفلسطينية التي هي عبارة عن العدو اللدود للفلسطينيين أنفسهم، وما خلفوا الانقسام من تبعات بعد ذلك. طبعا الدكتور جورج جالوي كان بيعاني من أزمة في تسيير القوافل لقطاع غزة والمضايقات اللي كان بيواجهها في ظل النظام السابق في مصر، إن كانت بغض النظر إن كانت هذه عبر إملاءات خارجية أو بإرادة مصرية. حاليا تغير النظام وأتى الدكتور محمد مرسي على الكرسي اللي تولى النظام في مصر. هل تعتقد أن الدكتور مرسي سيقدم لك تسهيلات للعمل على مساعدة أهل قطاع غزة؟
أنا أحمد أبو وردة، خريج إدارة أعمال، ناشط شبابي. نطلب من محمد مرسي تسهيل عملية التنقل والسفر. ثانياً فتح معبر تجاري بين قطاع غزة ومصر، لأن مصر دولة شقيقة، وليس وأن لا يكون هناك معبر تجاري بين الاحتلال وقطاع غزة. هل تعتقد أن نجاح مرسي سيفك الحصار عن قطاع غزة؟
المهندس رشاد أبو مدللة، ناشط شباب وسياسي من دوار أبو شريح، مخيم جبالي، قطاع غزة، فلسطين. نأمل من حكومة مصر ومحمد مرسي المساعدة في فتح معبر رفح، مساعدة الفلسطينيين في حرية التنقل والنيل من حقوقهم المشروع وحقوقهم الوطنية كاملة، وبنفس الوقت حماية المشروع الوطني والمنع أو منع مشروع التوطين للاجئين الفلسطينيين في مصر أو في أي دولة مجاورة. بصفتك نائب في البرلمان البريطاني وبصفتك مطلع على القانون الدولي، هل تعتقد أن محمد مرسي يمكنه نقض أو إعادة فتح اتفاقية كامب ديفيد والاتفاقية المصرية الإسرائيلية وتعديلها بالصالح الفلسطيني والصالح العربي، وإلزام إسرائيل بتنفيذ البنود التي تعطي أو تمنع شعب فلسطين والشعوب العربية حقوقها الكاملة؟
أنا اسمي رامي محسن، حقوقي وناشط شبابي. أنا بأتوقع وأنا بأمل إنه أن يستطيع وأن يساهم في حل المشكلات التي يعاني منها الفلسطينيين. هل أنت كنت تتوقع بفوز المرشح الإخوان المسلمين في رئاسة الحكم في مصر؟ وكذلك الأمر إنه هل تغيير معالم نظام الحكم في مصر من النظام مبارك إلى نظام الإخوان المسلمين هل سيساهم أو سيغير اللي هي موضوع التعامل مع وكسر الحصار المفروض على قطاع غزة؟
Well, more questions than answers there, of course, from the people under the siege for the fifth year now inside the Gaza Strip. First of all, the demands of the people are obvious. Open Rafah, open a commercial channel so that normal life can exist between two Arab countries, between two Muslim countries. Secondly, can Dr. Morsi do anything to change this? Does he have the power? That's the first point I want to deal with in relation to my friends in Gaza. First of all, President Morsi is in office. He's not necessarily in power. The power lies with the military. In the absence of a constitution, in the absence of a parliament, how much power does the president have? Very little at the moment. But this is my point again about process. A dynamic has now been begun in which, if I can use the word, a dialectic struggle between the different poles of power in Egypt will now unfold. And the president cannot ignore the military, but neither can the military ignore the president. Because behind the president lies not just millions of voters, but the potential of millions of marchers, protesters, occupiers, revolutionaries. That's what lies behind the president. What lies behind the military is billions of dollars of American military aid, decades of military influence, you could argue, power behind the scenes in Egypt, and possession. We have a saying in English that possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, the Egyptian military currently possesses the power. The task is to get it from them without bloodshed, without deaths on the streets, without civil war and conflict, like, for example, we are witnessing in Syria. Will he? Yes, if he can. Can he? Not at the moment. But I believe the moment will come when he can do so. Let's go back to the studio audience. Let's take another contribution from the audience. Yes, sir.
علي عطايا منظمة الشباب التقدمي. مصر العروبي، قلب العروبة النابض، مصر اللي بتدعم الحركات التحررية بكل العالم العربي. هيدي مصر اللي كل العرب بيحلموا فيها، وما شاب عربي هيدا حلمي. بس هل وصول محمد مرسي رح بيحقق هيدي النتيجة؟ أول سؤال. تاني سؤال، في كتير رؤساء مرقوا على مصر وعلى باقي الدول العربية، كلهم كان همهم القضية الفلسطينية بين مزدوجين، كلهم كانوا باسم القضية الفلسطينية يحكموا شعوبهم ويجيبوا سلاح، وشفنا هالسلاح وين عم يستعمل. شو رح بيفرق مرسي عن غيره؟ محمد مرسي وصل بانتخابات، الشعب المصري هيك بده، الشعب المصري نزل على الشارع على الطرقات، اسقط نظام حكم حسني مبارك لانه كان نظام استبدادي، طالب بالحريه، اجى محمد مرسي على اساس هو الحريه الموعوده. بس بغزه الشعب الفلسطيني اختار، نقى حركة حماس، طلعت حركة حماس بالانتخابات، حركة حماس حكمت، حركة حماس عصيت على الحكم، وملقت 100 طريقة تضلت عاصية على الحكم وبقيت بالحكم. مش ممكن يصير نفس الشيء بمصر كمان؟ حكينا كمان انه بمصر ممكن هي اللي تأمن طريق الخروج للفلسطينية من الحصار اللي هن فيه. حضرتك قلت انه النظام السوري هو الوحيد اللي كان ضد الإسرائيلية على مدى عقود، ويمكن عشان هيك عم يتحارب. بس ما كمان النظام السوري هو ذاته النظام السوري اللي بال76 فات على لبنان، قتل الحركة الوطنية وقتل منظمة التحرير الفلسطيني، ومن 78 من وقت قرار الهدنة ما طلعت رصاصة ضد العدو الإسرائيلي. كمان مش ممكن يكون هذا الشعب السوري عم بيناضل على حريته، عم بيناضل كرمال حريته، هو اللي يجيب الحرية للفلسطينيين. نحن مع حرية الشعوب وين ما كانت، من المحيط للخليج، وضد أي نظام استبدادي. يعطيك العافية.
I didn't say the Syrian regime was good. I just said it was not as bad as all the others. I didn't say that the Assad government, neither this nor the last, fought for the Palestinian people. I just said they didn't surrender. They didn't sign a humiliating peace. They didn't invite the Mossad into their capital city. They didn't kick out the Palestinian resistance. They didn't cut their relations with the Lebanese resistance, the only Arab army ever to defeat Israel. The Syrian regime did not agree that Israel could keep its land forever and a day. Sure, nobody needs to tell me, as somebody who was here in Lebanon in the 1970s, as somebody who has been with the Palestinian cause almost for 40 years, nobody has to tell me about the weaknesses of the Syrian regime vis-à-vis Palestine. But compare the Syrian regime with the others. That's the point. How come there's a regime, how come there is a jihad against the one frontline state which doesn't have a Camp David agreement, but there is no jihad in the countries that do have a Camp David agreement? How come there's a jihad against the one country that does not have the Mossad in its capital, but no jihad against the other countries that do have the Mossad in their capital? That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry if you're oversensitive to it, but I have to tell you how I see it. And that's how I see it. This is Kalima Horra after all. It's free words, free word by me. I'm going to go to his friend next to him who may or may not have the same point of view, but right after this break. Welcome back to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, here on Al Mayadeen TV. Welcome to the studio audience, but welcome to the ever larger international audience watching this show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in such numbers and such growing numbers. We're discussing the Egyptian elections. We're discussing their aftermath, not just for the people of Egypt, but for the people of Palestine, principally Gaza, under siege for 5 years for voting in a democratic election in a way that Israel and America and Britain didn't like. Democracy, shamocracy. Now, it's the audience's chance. Yes, sir. Fire away.
غسان العبد، إدارة أعمال الجامعة اللبنانية ورئيس القطاع الثانوي في شباب العزم. عرضت في معرض حديثك من بداية الحلقة بأن المسؤول الوحيد عن الحصار في قطاع غزة هو القوات المصرية التي كانت برعاية الرئيس المصري السابق حسني مبارك، وتجاهلت المعابر الحدودية الأخرى التي إسرائيل هي المسؤولة عنها، كما تجاهلت جدار العزل العنصري الفاصل عن الضفة الغربية. يعني إسرائيل إذا كان لديها من يقوم بحماية حدودها ويهدر دما من أجل حماية حدودها وأن يكون حريصا لها، هل ستعارض ذلك؟ شكرا.
Of course it is Israel that has occupied Palestine, wiped it off the map, settled it with illegal settlements, built an apartheid wall, erected hundreds and hundreds of military checkpoints, making the lives of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, as they call it, and occupied Jerusalem, absolute misery. But it was Mubarak who besieged Gaza. This is a simple matter of logic. Israel could not besiege Gaza. Sure, they could make life difficult by closing the crossing points between Gaza and what they call Israel. But that would still leave the exit of Rafah, which is, as far as I know, Egyptian, Arab, Muslim territory. But despite being Egyptian, Arab, Muslim, and having a president who called himself Muhammad Hosni Mubarak, they locked the door and starved the people in Gaza because the people in Gaza had voted in a free election in a way that the West did not like. I don't know what other crimes Mubarak carried out or committed. I don't know. But he deserves to burn forever in the hell fire for this one crime of collaborating with the illegal settler state of so-called Israel in the slow murder of his fellow religionists, his fellow Arabs, the Palestinian people in Gaza. Yes, sir, you're next. Go ahead.
أولا الانتصار الذي حققته مصر هو ليس فقط للإخوان المسلمين بل هو لمصر جميعها. أولا بالثورة التي بدأت، وثانيا بالانتخابات الديمقراطية والتحقق الديمقراطي. هناك مشوار طويل، هناك شغل كثير للدكتور محمد مرسي، انتقال السلطة من المجلس العسكري إلى الدولة الفعلية، الانتخابات والإصلاحات. أظن من أهم الأشياء التي أنضحت عنها الثورة المصرية هي إعطاء والانتخابات المصرية هي إعطاء نوع من الأمل للثورات العربية الأخرى، وخصوصا الثورة المباركة في سوريا. فبعدما أول شيء فعله الدكتور مرسي هو عدم الاعتراف بالنظام الأسدي القاتل لأولاده، وهيدي برأيي من أهم الأشياء التي عملها طبعا. ومن ثم إعادة النظر، يجب إعادة النظر بكامب ديفيد وفتح معمل رفح والعمل على مساعدة الإخوان في فلسطين. سؤالي لك بكل وضوح، هل تعتقد أن الإخوان المسلمين في سوريا والإخوان المسلمين في بقية البلاد العربية سوف يخطون نفس الخطى على خطى الإخوان المسلمين في مصر؟
No, I don't think so. But first of all, there are many sons being killed in Syria. Many sons. Every one of them is somebody's son. Whether they are on the side of the regime or on the side of the opposition to the regime. They are all sons of Syria. and their blood has been shed in the thousands by both sides. Don't tell me that only the regime is killing sons of Syria. Those opponents of the regime are also killing sons of Syria. And it's just strange to me that they are ready to kill thousands, maybe tens of thousands in Syria, but they will not lift a finger for jihad in other Arab countries which are and have always been on the path of treason towards the Palestinian people. That's just strange to me. That's all I'm saying. There is Arab countries where there is no freedom or liberty at all, which have one family rule, who even give the name of their family to their country. But there is no jihad in such countries. But the jihad is in Syria, and it seems those who are fighting it are ready to spend an ocean of blood
to get their freedom.
To get their freedom. What about their freedom in the other Arab countries? Are they ready to fight there? No, they are collaborating with these other Arab countries.
It depends. Every country has its own demographic
yeah, you're right.
view.
You're right.
Every country has its own
right.
ideas. And what's happening in Syria, it's also happening in each world. And you
No,
know,
it's not.
every in each country need to do this revolution.
Well, when are you starting in Saudi Arabia?
Let's start. If there is
when are you starting your revolution in Saudi Arabia?
Let the people start.
You are collaborating with Saudi Arabia against Syria. Don't tell me you are ready.
Start.
Don't tell me you are about to. You are ready to. You have to.
Saudi Arabia,
don't tell me that you are ready to fight.
Let's start to make a revolution.
Let's not speak over each other. You spoke, I'll speak, you speak again, okay? Don't tell me that you are ready for a revolution in Saudi Arabia. You are collaborating with Saudi Arabia to make a revolution in Syria. Saudi Arabia is giving you money and weapons and jihadists. So don't tell me it's about the need for a revolution in all these countries, because you are in league with these countries. You're too clever a man to imagine this. So what you're asking us to believe is that a revolution supported by McCain, by Lieberman, by Britain, France, America, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar is a revolution for good, for haq? Is that what you're asking me to believe? Are you asking me to believe that McCain and Lieberman are now on the side of haq? Are you asking me to believe that? That Netanyahu is now on the side of haq?
And we need to believe that a front with Israel in Julan stopped for more than 40 years, not a single drop.
So why is McCain supporting your revolution? Why is McCain supporting it? Because he wants a fight on the Julan?
Why did he support in Egypt? Why did we support in Libya? Why did he support in Tunisia? I don't care what does he believe. I don't care what they think in the United States.
You don't care.
I think about the Arab world. I think about the people are being killed in the Arab world. This is it.
No, only in Syria and the
Not
Arab world.
only in Syria.
No.
When
Gaza was being massacred,
even in Palestine,
when Gaza was being massacred, and the Arabs didn't lift one finger to support them.
This is why we need some revolution to start to talk about Palestine first.
That's why Al Saud is supporting your revolution?
I don't care about them.
No, you don't. You say you don't care about them, but they own you.
I don't care.
They already bought you.
Who?
They already have you in their pocket.
Who? They have who?
They bought you with their money. They bought you with their weapons. They bought you with their international political alignment. They already own you. Don't tell me you don't care.
Same thing happened with Syria and Iran.
Don't care. Look, don't tell me you don't care. They own you. You are theirs. You belong to them.
Iran owns Syria. This is the same. We have the same.
When did Iran kill the Palestinian people?
What
did Iran do to kill the Palestinian people? Iran are not even Arabs, but they are feeding the Palestinian people.
But they have their own project in the area.
Whether they have their own project or not, there is food in the bellies of the Palestinian people from Iran. How much came from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, and these other traitor countries who collaborated with Israel to starve the Palestinian people. You make me sick, you people, I must tell you.
Thank you.
Next one.
Thank you.
Good, we had our first walkout on Kalima Horra. Alhamdulillah. Yes, sister.
مي مروي الجامعة اللبنانية كلية العالم. سؤال كتير بسيط. هل بتتوقع أنه بيطرأ تغيير على سياسة مصر الخارجية بظل النظام الجديد؟ بظل وجود الحكم الجديد للدكتور مرسي؟
I'm not expecting much, as I said at the beginning. And therefore, I'm not going to be disappointed. I expect there to be a big difference in rhetoric coming from Cairo in relation to the Palestinian cause. I expect that. I expect there to be, in practical terms, more traffic between Egypt and Gaza, both ways. I expect that the humiliating, degrading treatment of the Palestinians going inside and coming out from Gaza will be eased. You have to have seen that to know it. Women with their children in the hot sun standing outside for days, trying to get inside Gaza. And people on the inside desperate for medical attention on the outside being blocked. I expect all that to change, either explicitly or implicitly, either because an announcement will be made by Dr. Morsi that the siege is over, but if not, if he can't do that, at least in real practical terms, make it over, even without announcement. I don't expect Camp David to be abrogated, but I don't expect it to be rigorously prosecuted. In other words, I think it will wither over the years on the vine. But this is a long war for Palestine. Guerra prolongada, as they say in Latin America. This is a long war that I will be dead before this Palestine is free. Now I am sure about that. But my sons, inshallah, will see this free Palestine, and so will you. We'll be back just in a minute after this. Welcome back to a spirited edition of Kalima Horra, where there's lots of free words flying around. But we've only got 15 minutes or so left, so let's get through as many of the audience's questions. Go ahead, sir.
محمد المعوش. بيتم التعاطي مع موضوع الثورات العربية بشكل اختزالي، وبخطابك اليوم عم بيتم التعاطي مع المسألة الفلسطينية كمان بشكل اختزالي، وكأنه الثورات العربية وحصار غزة هي مرحلة مقتطعة من التاريخ اللي عم بيعيشه العالم العربي على مدى مئات الأعوام من التطور. وبخطابك بالتعاطي مع المسألة المصرية كمان بيصير في اختزال لشكل سياسي شخصي لموضوع الصراع. بمداخلتك السابقة حكيت انه في أزمة اقتصادية عم تعيشها الدول العربية وتحديدا مصر، ولكن بتأملاتك نحو المصير اللي رح تواجهه مصر وتحديدا بقيادة مرسي والإخوان المسلمين، ما عم نقدر نربط الواقع الاقتصادي مع الخطة الاقتصادية، وبمعنى أن الدول العربية اليوم هي بحالة علاقة اقتصادية مع الاستعمار، وما صار في قطع لهي العلاقة، علاقة التبعية مع الاستعمار، وما واضح لنا من هي القوى الاجتماعية اليوم اللي عم تتجه نحو الحرية، وهل القوى السياسية اللي على المسرح السياسي اللي عم تقود المعركة السياسية هل بتمثل هيدي القوى الاجتماعية، وهل هي قادرة بحكم موقعها الطبقي الاقتصادي على القطع مع علاقة التبعية مع الاستعمار. وبالتالي منشوف قضية فلسطين ربطا بهذا الموضوع، وكأنه إسرائيل معزولة عن أداتها المعزولة عن دورها كأداة بإيد النظام العالمي.
Okay, but the richest countries in the world are Arab countries. The richest countries with the biggest sovereign wealth funds, with the biggest surpluses, are Arab countries. So there is no reason at all for there to be an economic crisis in the Arab world. Indeed, the Arab world should be the only place on the earth which doesn't have an economic crisis. Because Saudi Arabia has $6 trillion in America. If this $6 trillion was invested in the Arab world, your economy would be booming. Qatar is buying everything and everybody, it seems, except me. Qatar has a lot of money. So does the United Arab Emirates. They keep buying weapons with it, some of which end up killing sons of Syria in the civil war in Syria just in the last few days. So there is plenty of capital in the Arab world. The problem is this capital is controlled by a tiny group of one-family dictatorships and is used for the benefit of others rather than the Arabs. So if we really had a revolution here, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, and the wealth which God gave the Arabs was used for the Arabs, you would be the most prosperous place on the planet, rather than a place sunk in economic difficulty. Sister, did you want to ask a question, please?
زينب عنقة، كلية الإعلام والتوثيق. بعد الثورة التي شهدها الشعب المصري والتي قام فيها على مدار هذه السنة والسنة السابقة، هل سيستطيع الرئيس محمد مرسي تحقيق طموحات الشعب المصري؟ وهل سيستطيع إعادة الوزن السياسي والعسكري في الشرق الأوسط لمصر؟ وما موضوع الوضع الاقتصادي في مصر، علما أنه الفقر في مصر يتخطى 50% من الشعب؟ شكرا.
Actually, you know, in a way he's lucky, because nobody is expecting very much from him. As I told you, he wouldn't have been my first choice. He wasn't even the Muslim Brotherhood's first choice. He was their reserve candidate. Sometimes a president becomes a president and everyone has such high expectations, like President Barack Obama, for example. The whole world was expecting so much from him because he was so brilliant and such a change. And look how he disappointed us. If you are the opposite of Barack Obama, which you could say Mohammed Morsi is, people don't have high expectations, and therefore you don't have to achieve all that much to pleasantly surprise everybody. We had such a thing in our own country. Mrs. Thatcher was a giant figure, a giant, ugly, wicked, evil figure, but she was giant. And she was followed by a man called John Major, who you had to look very closely even to see him. But he was a better prime minister than she was, so it can happen. Yes, the gentleman in the glasses here, if someone could pass the microphone to him.
محمد أنصو، قطاع الطلاب في التنظيم الشعب الناصري. من الطبيعي أنه يكون عمل محمد مرسي صعب جدا، لأنه يستلم رئاسة الجمهورية بعد ثورة، مما يعني أن الشعب المصري ما زال ثائر، فهو يجب أن يكون دقيقا في عمله لكي لا يثور مرة أخرى الشعب عليه. فبرأيي إذا لم يتم معالجة الأزمة الاقتصادية التي تعاني منها مصر، سيكون هذه الأربع سنين التي سيستلم فيها الإخوان المسلمون تحت اسم محمد مرسي ستكون نهاية حقبة لهم. سيكون انتهاء فترة الإخوان المسلمين في هذه الأربع سنين إذا لم يباشروا في إيجاد حلول، أولا للأزمة الاقتصادية التي يعاني منها المصريين، وثانيا للأزمة السياسية وهي التبعية الإسرائيلية. والسؤال الثاني هو كيف برأيك يختلف الإخوان المسلمين في مصر عن الإخوان المسلمين في الدول العربية الأخرى، مع العلم أن الهدف واحد والمنبع واحد؟ وشكرا.
Well, let me deal with the second part. As I said earlier, the Muslim Brotherhood is different from one country to another, and in each country, the Muslim Brotherhood contains different trends and different schools of thought. It's not true that they only have one idea. They have one idea in that they are all Islamist parties, but that does not mean that they have one idea about how to make the buses run better, or the sugar production to be higher, or the oil and gas industry. There is no Islamic way to run a gas plant. There's only a good way and a bad way, and you have to acknowledge this. So Erdogan, for example, has a very highly capitalistic approach, but with a social policy which is clearly motivated by their Islamic ideology. So there is more equality in the distribution of the wealth being generated by Turkish capitalism than there would be in a country like Britain, where there is no religion actually at all. And I expect the same in Egypt, although the problem in Egypt is not distributing surplus, but dealing with a deficit, unlike Turkey, which is highly successful economically. Look, Morsi is not Nasser. There is no more Nasser. There was only ever one Nasser. Once in 1,000 years, there is a Nasser. So don't expect Morsi to be Nasser or half Nasser. He will be less than half Nasser, but he will be more than twice Mubarak. Yes, sir, please. Let's hear from the front row. Microphone, please. Yes, go ahead, sir.
بس بدي أعلق على شغلة، على النقاش اللي صار مع أحمد زميلنا طيار المستقبل. عرفتك من ساعة عن حالي، ما قلت الصفة. جاد شيا، مسؤول السنويات والمعاهد بالأمانة العامة لمنظمة الشباب التقدمي. رفيقنا علي كمان بالمنظمة استأذن وظهر بناء على ظرف عنده طارئ، وليس تضامنا مع النقاش ومع تحفظنا على النقاش. ونحن نحترم الآراء.
At least I had half a walkout. I had one walkout. Don't take it from me. I want to have a walkout.
But
I'm doing my job. I want argument, fierce argument. Go on, sir.
Of course. نحن بنحترم جميع الآراء من كافة الأفرقاء، ومن كل واحد له وجهة نظره. علينا السماع، يا بنقتنع يا ما بنقتنع بهذه الآراء. بس بدي أرجع على نقطة مهمة. أنتم عم تجاوبني على يمكن سؤالي. تكلمت إنه الثورة المصرية أتت بأقدام الرجال أو الفئة الشعبية المصرية، كانت بعقولهم ثم ذهبوا إلى ميدان التحرير بأقدامهم. إذا تطرقنا إلى الثورة السورية اليوم، طبعا نوجه تحية للثورة السورية، لأننا نحن ضد كل أنظمة القمع في العالم، وضد أي نظام يقمع ويقتل. نحن ضد هذا الشيء حيث وين ما بيكون. نحن الدول كانت حليفتنا أو مش حليفتنا، كل إنسان ظالم ومستبد نتمنى أن يأتي دوره ويأتي الزمن الذي يحاكم به. إذا تطرقنا لهذه الثورة التي نعتبرها سلكت مرحلة معينة وهي في طريقها، ونرى النظام الذي يقمع ويقتل الأطفال كما يقمع ويقتل نظام العدو الإسرائيلي، كما يقمع الإخوة العرب الفلسطينيين. هم أيضا النظام السوري يقمع شعبه وأخوته بنفس الطريقة، وهذا شيء محرم ومنكر، خصوصا أنهم يعني اليوم الشعب السوري أو هذه الناس الثوار هم إخوة الجيش. كيف يقمع العسكري أخاه وابن أخاه، هاي الأطفال البريئة؟ أنا بس بدي أتطرق لهاي المقارنة. إذا كانت الثورة المصرية أتت بأقدام وعقول المصريين والشعب المصري، هل السوريون أو الثورة السورية هي ليست بناء على عقل الشعب السوري وأقدامه في ميادين التحرير؟ لذلك لم نرى نتيجة ساحقة تلو الآن.
Please, let me deal with this. First of all my respects to my comrade Walid Jumblat. I knew him for 30 years. He's a friend of mine. So he'll understand what I mean when I say to you, be careful, because your line might be different next week before this program goes out. So be careful about this. You are a young man. Let me give you some advice. When you are a comrade of Walid, don't be so unequivocal, because today's unequivocality, it might be different next week. And everybody watching this knows exactly what I mean. The killing of the people of Syria might be denied by some. It's not denied by me. I am not with the Syrian regime. I am against their enemies, because their enemies are worse than them. I was not with Saddam Hussein, but I was against his enemies because his enemies were worse than him. This is a level of sophistication in politics which seems to be beyond some people. It's the difference between playing chess and playing drafts or checkers. You have to see the big picture. I told President Bashar al-Assad, personally, I asked him to call a democratic presidential election in Syria immediately after the revolution in Tunisia began. I told him, do it, and if you do, you will win, and you will be the first, indeed the only, Arab leader with any popular legitimacy in the Arab world. I wish that he took that advice. I support Kofi Annan's political transition plan. I support the position of the Russian and Chinese governments in relation to Syria, which happen to be the policy of the Arab League also, though you would not know it if you judged the Arab League's action. Kofi Annan's plan is on behalf of the UN and the Arab League, but the only people who are not implementing it are the people who keep demanding international action. This is a complete paradox and contradiction. I think the Syrian regime made disastrous mistakes, not just in the last 18 months, but in the last 30 years, 40 years. Yes, 40 years, wallah. They made disastrous mistakes in this period, but they are not the worst. And they are not being targeted because of their mistakes. They are being targeted because of the mistakes they refuse to make. They are being targeted, and Walid used to know this and used to say it, and tomorrow he might say it again, inshallah. They are being targeted because they refuse to surrender to Israel, because they refuse to break their relations with the national resistance movement in Lebanon, because they refuse to give up the Golan, because they refuse to allow their country to be a base for American imperialism in the region, to invade and occupy and control other Arab countries. Now, if you know that, why would you be with Lieberman and McCain? What kind of Arab can be with Lieberman and McCain? It's not possible. So, to be against terrorism, Al-Qaeda, and the intervention of foreign powers in Syria is not the same thing as being with the regime in Syria or anywhere else. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, keep tuning in to Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen TV. Thank you very much indeed.